Hi, this is Jeffrey Wernick. I'm here only with Ryan today so far. Bruce is taking longer than he expected, and he planned to be in a deposition. And Dennis is also seemingly tied up. And each will try and make themselves available sometime during this podcast if they have the opportunity to. So meanwhile, for today, it will be Ryan and myself. So first, Ryan, I hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
You too, Jeffrey. Thank you.
So yes,
apologize for my casual tire this morning. It's about 50 degrees in here. I forgot to turn my heater on. So
I hope you got it turned on now so you get warmed up. But Ryan, what I'm reminded of in whenever we see the blame game in politics, and I think how destructive the blame game is, we have this tragic shooting of the National Guard in D.C. Apparently, we had a Afghani refugee who served alongside us, I think, for about 10 years in Afghanistan. Would have assumed that the CIA and the people there in Afghanistan would have done some vetting of who they allied themselves with, and it was not a brief relationship; it was a long-term relationship. And what have we learned? First, we see an interview where, and I'm trying to get to the point. This is going back to the theme that we talk about so frequently, is the debasement of language. So what do we have? We first have a complaint about this person basically not being vetted at all. And it was Biden's failed exit from Afghanistan. And when someone asked Trump if why does he keep blaming Biden for the shooting, basically, I think Trump called the person stupid and insulted the person. And subsequent to that, what did we find out? Is that actually this person in April of this year, by the Trump administration, was granted asylum. So we would have assumed that they would have, and I'll play this video in a second that you just put up. We would have assumed that during the process of granting asylum, that this administration would have done their own due diligence before granting asylum. You have an administration that claims Biden did no vetting of anyone. So if you're getting an asylum application and you've already made statements over and over and over and over and over again that the Biden administration was a complete disaster, the worst administration in the history of the country, that they did absolutely no vetting, wouldn't you think that before they granted asylum, that they would then begin doing vetting? And wouldn't you think that if asylum was granted during this period of time, so the last authorization that allowed this person to remain in the country, okay, was done by the Trump administration, and apparently they have no sense of responsibility. I'll play this and I'll get into a little longer rant on this, but let me add to the stage what you just put up there.
Why do you blame the Biden administration?
Because they let him in. Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person. And there's a law passed that it's almost impossible not to get them out. You can't get them out once they come in.
Now, just to save us time, he basically rambles borderline incoherently for the rest of that statement. That was the bulk of the point right there. I was just backing up what you showed or what you said. To me, it's just desperation. To your point, I mean, obviously, I agree with you what you said. The point is really that, it's both administrations' fault, if anybody's at fault. And this is just an effort to pin it on one side, even though it's obvious that they played a factor in the asylum in 2025. It's pretty sad. But go ahead if your follow-up points.
The fortunate thing to me is, again, the debasement of language and the fact that we really can't have and this is partisanship makes people morons.
Yep.
So anyone who's a hyper partisan, very partisan, loses their objectivity, and they only look at one side of the argument, not both sides of the argument. And so by definition, if you only look at one side of the argument and not both sides of the arguments, you're an idiot. Okay. So smart people look at both sides of an argument, not only one side of an argument.
I would even add, which I'm sure you're saying the same, all sides of the argument, right? Like not just in every possible perspective, which I agree.
So I want to recount as quickly as I can the facts about Afghanistan. Okay. Facts. Okay. Fact one, Trump signed a deal with the Taliban, okay, to have a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan. Trump signed a deal with the Taliban that did not include the Afghani government without consultation with the Afghani government. So Trump decided he was representing Afghanistan, and he was turning over Afghanistan to the Taliban. And that turnover date was supposed to be, as long as everybody complied with the terms and conditions of that agreement, was supposed to be May of 2021. Okay. Now, Trump, at that point in time he signed the agreement, he had all the confidence that he was going to win an election and still be president at that point in time, and that he would be turning over Afghanistan to the Taliban. So now let's look at what happened during that period of time. Okay, now the Afghani government knows it's gone, okay, in the middle of 2021. Okay, so they basically are a lame duck administration the moment Trump signed that agreement. Okay, the moment he signed that agreement, they became lame ducks. Okay, how hard do you think the military is going to fight, knowing they're not going to have money in a period of time either? And while they're watching the U.S. withdraw, the Taliban were not in compliance with all the terms and conditions, and the U.S. did nothing about the lack of compliance. Pretty much the message from the Trump administration was, as long as you leave American troops alone, we're okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what had happened is the Taliban turned their focus on the Afghani military effort. And what's the incentive for the Afghani military to fight? They're fighting for what? They're giving over the country to the Taliban, in May. Doesn't anybody think and use common sense?
Well,
by the time Biden came into office, the security situation had already deteriorated, to a terrible point that either to preserve it, you were not going to then recruit more Afghanis to fight, because in just a few months you're going to go up. There's no enthusiasm from the Afghani government. So the only thing the U.S. could have done at that point in time is accelerated withdrawal, or send more troops back in.
One quick point, I'll let you continue. Let's not forget, the Taliban was the very focal point for why the U.S. government claimed they were there to begin with. That's just ridiculous. Add to how stupid all this is. And both administrations, in their own ways, have, a further step back, I think the Taliban is not what it appears to be. I don't think they've ever truly been fighting it the way they claimed, and I think that shows that now. But continue.
Yeah. So you have a situation where, could the withdrawal, and so now you have Trump expecting to be president, knowing that he's basically ignored all the non-compliance since they were not targeting American troops. He keeps saying he would have kept that air base, but he only said that after Biden was president and Biden was gone. So while of that, is there any evidence at all, given the fact that Trump left office in January with a commitment to be out by May, a commitment he signed onto? Okay, is there any evidence that he left Biden a plan? When they were thinking about how to, supposedly we have a number between 70,000 to 90,000 Afghanis came as refugees, because of their supporting our efforts for 10, 20 years, however many years we were there.
This guy was a part.
Efforts, so you would assume that once you made an effort that we're leaving, you would assume that somebody would start making a list of who worked with us that we need to start vetting now for refugee status. You would have assumed that they would have started that process. So to be fair to Biden, he came in at the end of January, had to be out in May, and he had to plan the exits, put together which refugees needed in all that period of time, because apparently absolutely none of that effort was done, or at least we have no evidence that it was done, by the Trump administration. And if it was done, he certainly not talked about it. Okay, for a guy that brags about everything, he didn't say anything about it. And again, I don't want to let Biden off the hook, okay? But Biden came in a very difficult situation, and Trump left him in that very difficult situation. Whether Trump could have done better than Biden, we don't really know the answer. Everybody always says after the fact, I could have done better. That's very easy to say those words, but we do know is that this is a fact that the security situation significantly deteriorated. And we should have known after 20 years where we were trying to prevent the Taliban to take power, and that was the reason why we were there, that instead of preventing them, we handed it over to them. That don't we think we had any moral obligation to the people who we just completely abandoned?
Right.
Okay.
But see, this is where, so that is a very fair perspective from, if, and I'm not saying we know for sure one or the other, there is a partisan kind of a battle going on within this, but my perspective, and I tend to stand back and look at this as it makes it much more simple to think about the vetting under the context that they never really even tried. That if you stand back and look at the rest of the pictures, like Israel funding Hamas, or is it the United States and Israel and UK funding terrorists in Syria or Afghanistan. The point is that in most of these circumstances, you can find the U.S. government and other governments included, but the focal point being U.S. at this point, funding and working with the very groups they otherwise pretend to be fighting, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. So in this case, I think it's more simplified by realizing that we can get into the zero units, which were the group this guy was a part of, and the 70,000 was that was the group he came in through in regard to immigration. But they worked for these zero units in Afghanistan with the CIA that were, human rights groups around the world were calling them out for killing civilians, for just human rights violations. And these were the groups that were run and supported by the U.S. government. And so if you stand back and look at all that, they knew he was doing this. They were funding him doing that, the very things they claim they're fighting elsewhere. So I think it's more nuanced than they didn't vet him, which I do think is part of it. Maybe because they don't want to look too hard, but more so that neither administration wanted to vet or look too hard because of what it was. Now, for whatever reason, it blew back up in their face. And so Trump is trying to pin it on Biden. But it's the whole of government, foreign policy disaster they've been doing for my entire life. So I think that makes it a little more simple. But within the two-party divide, I'm sure you're absolutely right that there is an effort, that ultimately there was an effort to sort of pin that disaster on Biden, and he did what he could within it. But if you stand back and look at the full foreign policy picture, let me put it this way. Why wouldn't have Biden have basically tried to call that out? Why wouldn't they be saying that now? I think it's because all of them want this to sort of go away because it ties back to a bigger government problem,
And all I want is an intelligent conversation.
Absolutely.
That's all I want is intelligent, honest conversation, not just finger pointing.
Yes.
When nobody, it's very simple. All Trump's fault, all Biden's fault. What do we learn from that? We learn absolutely nothing. Maybe people like to feel better because that's a simple world for them. The simple world is for simple-minded people.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of it, Jeffrey. I think it makes the world easier and digestible for people who don't want to think too hard into it.
Yeah. So Trump can make all the claims he wants to make, but the reality is there's no evidence that he would have done any better. And maybe he would have, but maybe he wouldn't have. So we don't really know. Would he have been able to keep the airbase? We don't know, because the reality was the security situation was very deteriorated. So we don't know what the military would have said. If you want to keep the airbase, what's involved in keeping the airbase? Okay. So was there there doesn't seem to have ever been that conversation. So since apparently Trump never planned the exit, even though the exit was 5 months away from his last day in office, again, no evidence of any planning. That seems to be pretty irresponsible. Okay.
A very simple, one more simple way to look at it. I find it hard to believe this would be the only thing, but it could just be simply that Trump wanted to have that standing out in the, for his administration to claim that they pulled out of Afghanistan and nothing else mattered. The people, U.S. citizens, investment, that seems to line up with Trump more than anything else. But I would argue there's more than that, but that makes sense.
And I ask people, look, I'm not letting Biden off the hook, but people died upon our exit. Could somebody have done it better? I don't really know whether somebody could have come better. Of course, there's this reputation that Biden is just an idiot and everybody in the military is just an idiot and they just don't know how to do this type of things. And you can make the assumption they just don't know how to do it. Or did really the situation just get out of control and they had to make a decision? Do we send more troops back in? or do we just try and under the imperfect circumstances get them out? So it's very easy. It's very easy to do Monday, morning quarterbacking. But the reality is Trump delivered a horrible situation to Biden. Okay. He did. Okay. That should be an indisputable fact of what the circumstances were the day Biden took his oath of office. And then you take a look at Trump, people say, yes, 13 people died. And that's a tragedy that 13 people died, that day of the exit. How many people died during the Trump administration when he could have, the day he walked into office, he could have given Taliban Afghanistan? So how much money did Trump spend and how many Americans died during those 4 years of the Trump's administration? For what? What was accomplished? He could have day one gone in and said, this is a mistake, I'm getting out. Okay. So what did he know 4 years after that he didn't know year one when he ran in 2016 on getting out of Afghanistan? So for whatever reason, he decided once he got in the office, he wasn't going to get out. I don't know what he thought he was going to accomplish, but he left Afghanistan in a worse shape than he came in. I mean, that's also a fact. Afghanistan was in a worse shape in 2020 than it was in 2016. And he inherited a bad situation from Barack Obama, who inherited a bad situation from George Bush. I mean, so I don't want to just put this just on Trump, is that people, but people owned their decision the day they took office. It was no longer what the other person did. It's what they did with what they inherited. Okay. So what we know what Trump did with what he inherited. Trump basically said, I'm going to stay 4 years, spent a lot of money. I think the number is somewhere between 40 and 50 Americans died during those period of time. More than. So we can sit back and say during the Biden administration, less people died in Afghanistan than the Trump administration. During the Biden administration, we spent less money on Afghanistan than we did during the Trump administration. So, Biden accomplished us from at least getting out after Trump handed over Afghanistan to the Taliban. Okay, so whatever statements Trump has made subsequent to that, people can sit and they can cite them because it proved. Many people think it was a mistake, but maybe it was a mistake that was less bad than the other mistake of continuing to spend money, for who knows what purpose.
And I would argue,
go ahead,
that both of us would agree that they shouldn't be there in the first place, right? So agree with you. And then even further back, it's just that, but any administration that continues it is at fault for allowing that, as well as the fact that I still argue that there's more relationship with the groups they claim they're fighting than is being presented. But your statement's absolutely correct. I mean, you have to acknowledge the current reality. Like, this is the point we make about Trump and what he's doing in general, being more extreme than, anything I've seen before, but not being different in essence than what's happened, but he's just doing it in an extreme, clumsy, obvious, intense way. So it's similar, but he is doing it to a degree that's more bombastic. That's completely fair. I think that's just Trump's nature.
Yeah. So instead of us having a conversation that, yes, we should be glad. I don't know. Do the American people want to go back into Afghanistan? I don't think the American people want to go back in Afghanistan.
I don't think we really left, Jeffrey. And that's a different conversation, but I actually genuinely don't think, like, whether we're talking about mercenaries like Blackwater types or there are actually just personnel that we can prove on the ground, but not in the sense of like deployment in war. But other countries deal with the same kind of thing where there's a very minimal presence, but they use proxy forces and other groups they work with, as well as their more, behind the scenes stuff. So, with the base statement, I think that kind of made it clear to me that they never really left. And what do you think about that?
I don't know. Is it possible that we have proxy forces there?
I know we do, but
we seem to use proxies everywhere. So you're right. We seem to never really leave anywhere. We give the appearance that we've left, but we've gone underground with our efforts. So and we won't get informed of what our efforts really are until somebody has enough information to actually to disclose, present something that they can disclose. I think we saw that Kristi Noem, from what I read, has now acknowledged that they ignored the court order with respect to the plane. So she just said, that she ignored it. We now have, the allegations that there was a second strike against people where allegedly that Hegseth said,
Terrible.
kill them all. He's denying it, but it seems to me that the military has to have videos of it, and it's very easy. Like we've never heard the audio of the alleged payment of $50,000 to Tom Homan, because you don't need to have a conversation. All you need to say is, here's the audio, and the American people could decide for themselves. But they want to tell us what to think rather than giving us the information for us to decide for ourselves. So, the government has an obligation, as a fiduciary on our behalf, which is what their job is, a fiduciary on our behalf, is they should leave the decisions to us. They should be transparent, and we should judge what's important and not important. So that's for us to judge, not for them to judge on our behalf. We never delegated that discretion to them.
Right.
So,
Now, this is a point that is probably clear to most that watch this show regularly, but what you just said there is such an important general idea that what they're trying to transition us into, more of the Trump administration than I've ever seen. The idea that they are, we were given a mandate, which means we just do what we want, and that's what you guys voted for. It's the other way around entirely, and we know that, right? They should be acting out what the living embodiment of their constituents, which is just not the way I think it's ever been. But to think about that as Americans today, how far away we've gotten from that. I mean, Trump displays that every day, Article 2 and so on.
Yeah, so they can show us. They can show us the if something is easy to prove. Human nature generally is, if I'm making a claim and it's easy for me to back up my claim, I want to back up my claim for multiple reasons.
Right.
I want to back up my claim to validate who I am, and I want to back up my claim to prove you're a fucking liar. It's part of my expression, because that's part of the pleasure of proving yourself right, is proving that people who tell you they don't believe you is proving them wrong in a way that they have to acknowledge them wrong. I mean, that's really victory. That's victory of basically saying, here is the evidence, and the evidence is so clear that you have to acknowledge that you were wrong. Okay.
Right.
So if somebody makes a false allegation about me, okay, and it's one that's easy to prove, okay, I want to prove it. I want to prove it because I want to hear that other person say, I was wrong. I want to show them the evidence, either to have them say they were wrong or to have them disappear from shame and embarrassment. Right. Okay, where everybody in the world knows they're a fucking liar. Okay. So I like outing liars, okay? So the best way for me to out a liar, okay, is to show evidence. It's not the words that come out of my mouth, is to bring the evidence to the table, and evidence that no reasonable person would have any doubt about. So the government has that evidence. The government has the ability easily, to remove any doubt from the circumstances.
What's interesting?
Why aren't they presenting it?
Yeah, that's a great point. And what's interesting about it? Well, I mean, I guess I would argue that we're in this confounding time where we've seen this repeatedly. We've talked about repeatedly on the show, where they will say something like, "We'll have the evidence." Literally, they'll lose a 0-7 Supreme Court ruling, and Stephen Miller will just claim they won 7-0. And then you can come and give the actual evidence. And what's confounding is that's, to some people, that still doesn't seem to change their mind. So in a normal sense, I agree with you. That's how that should work. But in a weird way today, they've sort of inverted all of this, like even over the overlapping of the court stuff you talked about, where they just deny it, ignore it. And so you're in the sense of presenting the evidence like we do. Like, if they don't reveal it to us, it almost clouds it even more. Because obviously, if they put it out, we'll be able to prove that they were lying. But if they just have to state it and people believe them, that goes far enough. But if we prove it to them and they still deny it, I mean, how do you circumvent that? We're in a time where far too many people, I think you do think it's the majority, I think it may be a little bit less than that, blindly follow whatever they're told. I mean, what does evidence mean in a time like that?
Well, one of the people watching today said that everybody knows that the world is full of stupid people. So that's a statement I will not dispute.
Thank you, Katie.
That's a big major part of the problem, is the world is full of a lot of stupid people, much too many stupid people, so I think that's a major problem, because I think you have to. I think these arguments we're presenting are so logical and so obvious, that either people are dumb because they don't want to look and they don't have the cognitive skills to be able to listen and talk, because they're so blinded by their partisan nature, that they want to shut their eyes to the truth, or that really, they're significantly mentally impaired. So I don't know. I would think a lot of it is not necessarily, a mental impairment. I think it's more, an emotional derangement, that they have too much of their identity tied up into being part of a tribe. And
I
since
think
they
that's
want to be a member of a tribe, they got to be loyal to that tribe. And if
Mhm.
being loyal to the tribe means lying to prove their loyalty, that's basically their objective function.
It's team sport politics. I mean, look, I've seen it's few and far between in my experience, but I've seen very intelligent people fall into that trap. People that I don't argue are dishonest, because I would argue a very dishonest, intelligent person could probably just choose to do that. But I've seen people that I would not expect fall into it. And I think it's what you just said. It's that their identity's wrapped up in this. And a team sport politics, it's like watching a football game. Nobody really feels it's like dishonest to root for the ref to rule incorrectly in your favor. You know what I mean? Like, they don't think of that as a dishonest thing. And they've just applied it to politics today. It's I don't think it's the majority though, but it's far too many.
Yes. And also another comment that's now being made that I also agree with is that too many who believe they're smart because they manage to accumulate wealth.
Yes.
So, I remember, in my case, and I know my personal experience in my case, one day, and even I said one day, I had my risk management model and I sold it for a lot of money. And at 25, I was very, very wealthy. And suddenly, even my mother said, "Oh, Jeffrey, you're such a genius." I said, "You think I'm much smarter today than I was yesterday?" Yes, you're basically now you're reappraising me because somebody else put a dollar value on my work.
Mhm.
Suddenly you're reappraising my intelligence, not because of anything you observed on your own, but because just some third party who you don't even know, but they got a name brand out there, and because some name brand was willing to write me a check, and then you made a judgment. Hey, maybe my son is not so stupid. So somebody was giving him all this money. Maybe I should be proud of this guy. Because somebody was being able to write the check, and then suddenly people think you're an expert in everything now because somebody wrote you a check. No, I had one idea. I did a good job of executing it, and somebody valued that one idea. Did that make me an expert on everything? No, it didn't make me an expert on anything. It made me an expert on just one thing, and that was it. So then I have to keep proving myself. So, but yeah, because, now, you sit back and you hear some people and we want to hear their opinion on everything. Like somehow they have this extra wisdom because they knew how to make money in something, that somehow they have this wisdom on everything, and, only, stupid or vain people, think that they have wisdom on every topic, under the sun.
And
No,
worse,
people should know what they, I always remembered from the Dirty Harry, at the end of the movie, Clint Eastwood says to the guy, "A man's got to know his limitations." I mean, so that's really great advice. Okay, is that everybody should be very well aware of what they're good at and what they're bad at.
oh yeah.
So I'm certainly aware of what I'm bad at.
What's worse is the people, like, clearly you made that and were benefiting because of what your work was, right? But there's plenty of people out there. I would even argue like an Elon Musk who, it's not, they didn't develop into it. There was wealth there beforehand. So it's like, it's almost even worse to argue that they're special because of wealth that they kind of already had, even just because they added to it. It's just, that's everywhere today. There's so many of these oligarchs out there that it's just generational wealth. And they argue that gives them some kind of, standing in the society, which is unfortunate. It's the value of money to people's minds.
And then also fame. If you become famous, now all of a sudden people want to hear what you have to say because they want to hear from somebody who's famous and somebody who's not so famous.
Right.
So, if you listen to, these talking heads on just about any program on mainstream media, and compare that to the, the wisdom of like our colleague Bruce, okay, there's no comparison when it comes to the type of topics they're talking about, that Bruce is significantly more prepared than the talking heads you see on TV. So the other day somebody sent me a message. I think it was just yesterday. I think about, somebody did a tweet criticizing the people promoting Bitcoin. So, and criticizing Bitcoin because of the people promoting Bitcoin. So he asked me what I thought of this tweet. So I wrote back to him. I said, okay, you know what? I'll tell you what I think of this tweet. The people promoting it are in a business of trying to make money off of Bitcoin. Okay. But if you take a look at who the whales are, people who bought for themselves, not people who invested in Michael Saylor's fund, or gave money to the other funds, but the people who actually began accumulating way before these funds existed. Okay. And people who have been communicating, you don't see them out there promoting Bitcoin. They keep a low profile. So the real whales as individuals, not the institutions, have gotten a lot of retail money and institutional money to invest it in it as a speculative asset. The real Bitcoiners who bought into the philosophy, who bought into what Bitcoin represents, who have bought it and held it, and taken it off exchanges, they don't talk. So they keep a low profile. So, so you're talking to maybe the charlatans, the con artists, the late players who are trying to now, take advantage of, which is appropriate in capitalist system, that people see an opportunity for making a profit, attracts people, good and bad people to that activity. Wherever there's money, people will be attracted to follow wherever the money is. And there'll be good people at doing that and bad people doing that. But wherever there is money, people are going to follow it. Bitcoin, it became evident that people, that initially it was the government was kind of against it. So people were reluctant to adopt it. Now the government is not so much against it. So people think I'm not getting in trouble for holding it, and institutions are involved or whatever. So, more people got involved and a lot more people now are holding it, which is okay. And then they started talking about, well, now people are out marketing for institutions, and stuff like that. But this is all human nature. But the reality is they're not focusing on the fact is that the largest individual holders of Bitcoin, who have been holding it for a long period of time, keep a very low profile. So, but of course you're going to get people who will, who will just like kind of promote themselves under, any circumstances. So, and they don't try and present themselves as any wiser than anybody else. They just quietly hold, and hodl and maybe accumulate more, more Bitcoin. I mean, I'm probably one of the, the few people out there, who make it, who are, OGs and who have accumulated a reasonable amount of people. But I don't hawk Bitcoin. I don't go out every day encouraging people to buy Bitcoin. Every once in a while, somebody will ask me to do an interview. I'll talk about Bitcoin. But, I'm not out there telling people take over their life savings, invest in Bitcoin. I don't have a business. I'm not selling my own Bitcoins. Okay. I just accumulate. And I don't recommend any other business for people to do other than I tell people, if you're interested, self-custody. And, if you're interested. So people should decide for themselves what they want to do and not do. And of course, if you come across an expert and you want to ask somebody who likes to think they're an expert, but even a responsible expert, like I consider myself, tell people, I'll tell you what my point of view is, but don't do anything based upon what I say. Do anything because you've done your own due diligence.
Right.
I would never want, I got a pretty high opinion of myself. Okay. So with respect to my investing skills and my intellectual skills, but as high opinion as I have about myself and what I think I'm talented at, I would never want anybody acting on anything because I said so. Okay.
Right.
So I want people acting, I'd like to think that somebody who's smart would say, Jeff's a smart guy and let me think about his words. But there's a difference between thinking about my words and agreeing with my words or just following them blindly. That would be the worst thing.
Yep.
I mean, people should make these decisions for themselves, not because of what some asshole, including me, says. Okay.
That's my favorite quote from Roosevelt in regard to the president point and partisanship. Same kind of point, right? It's just that blind, subservience or blind acceptance or anything like that. It's just ignorance, even if it turns out to be correct. it's still ignorant, like you're saying, because you just don't know. You should investigate, you should do your due diligence, and you should question and be open to all possibilities. The quote from Roosevelt was just that to blindly support the president, right or wrong, is servile and, what do you say, morally treasonable to the American people. I love throwing that out there today because so many people are like literally calling the word patriotism blind support for Trump. It's pretty sad.
No, this is, and in my opinion, there's only one way to be patriotic. Is the fact is that is adherence to the Constitution. Okay,
Yep.
Not to the Democratic Party, not to the Republican Party. Okay, not to shutting borders or any other specific policy. It's the Constitution. And if we take a look at probably our most our intellectual founding generation, you could say that maybe the top two was Jefferson as the greatest intellectual, and Madison, not far behind. And one wrote as a principal author of the Declaration. The others considered the father of the Constitution. And they each believed that they wrote a document that was meant to be subject to a strict construction. So they didn't believe that that it was that people, because actually I did a post today on behalf of the fine print. I think it might be up now on X. Where I take a quote is that Jefferson said that people viewing the Constitution and constructing it should not construct it from a general specific detailed analysis of the text itself, but the goal of the text. And he said, while the text, sometimes people can play games with the text, at the end of the day, you have to look at the text in the context of what their objective was.
Mm-hmm.
And their objective was for virtuous people to live free with a very, very limited government.
Right.
And what was the document? The document was to what was the utility function? Maximize utility, maximize liberty, maximize freedom, minimize the fact that we'd ever be in a state of tyranny, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That we'd ever have centralized power, that we'd ever have a big government, okay? And it's just as a fact is we lived, as we've talked about a number of times in the past in the show, for the first up until the year we created the Fed and the income tax and direct election of senators, 1913, prior to that, government was very, very small. We spent about 3.5% of GDP, and now we spend almost 50% of GDP, as a size of government. And then we had very little regulation, and we needed very little that we needed to ask permission from the government to do. And now we need to ask permission of almost everything. Then we had almost no disclosure. Think about it. We had really no disclosure obligations, right? You're not buying an income tax return. So basically the government said, we don't need to know anything about you, okay? You operate in your local jurisdiction. You have a local law enforcement, local laws, and if you break those local laws, you'll be responsible for those local laws. And for the few federal laws, if you break them, you'll be in violation of those federal laws. But basically, we didn't have this extensive penal code, that we had today, and we didn't have this society that you require permission. We didn't have a heavily burdened regulatory state. So we seem to do pretty well without all this stuff. We became
better.
We became from 13 colonies that had to deal with continued efforts from Europeans to interfere with our sovereignty,
Right.
and ultimately they acknowledged it, and we expanded to become 50 states, and I guess we were over 40 by the time 1930 came around. I think we've just maybe added 2 states since then. I guess it's just Hawaii and Alaska in the 20th, in the 20th century. But I could be wrong on that. I have to check, but that's best my knowledge. And so we prospered. We came from a small country to one of the wealthiest in the world during a period of time when we had a real state of freedom and very little, even with the destruction of economic value that occurred during a horrible civil war where many people were killed. how quickly we recovered from that, as we adapted because we were relatively free people, and relatively free people left to themselves figure out how to way of solving problems.
Right. Self-responsibility is the foundational element of this, This is why I bring up the point, and I'm actually glad we got into that a little more in depth about, if you're going to say shall not be infringed, God given, I still find it impossible that those things can then be altered or changed, and so as a society, we can decide collectively just to go, we don't believe in this anymore. But if we're within the Constitution, and it's been ruled more than once, Mabry versus Madison, I often point to that, if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void, which is we can amend these things. And Bruce gave some good, shine some light on that in regard to more nuance to it. But I still think it's important to think about that, if we get to a point to where these things are being slowly eroded, and it's going back to the words even in the same conversation, is that this is shall not be infringed. So if we believe that we have the right to this, for some grouping of men to get together and say, well, we argue, because you put us here, that we can just remove that just seems completely counterintuitive to me. It's like it's a core value concept that living document we can alter if it's not repugnant to the original ideals, which are for everybody. It's as much as you and I both discuss a world without government, I still argue that this is the best that's been achieved in regard to trying to have some check and balance within a state of society.
And I will continue to argue that for people who are really patriotic, to me, one of the greatest patriotic acts is when you see unjust laws or an unjust application of law nullify.
Yeah, right.
If there's an unjust law, the unjust law will have to be adjudicated in some court. And when you have an opportunity of serving on a grand jury, or then a jury, if you ever have an opportunity to do that, if you're listening to the law that somebody's accused of violating, okay, and or you think that it's a persecution of the law in the sense that this person is somewhat targeted, as opposed to it's a general application that's pretty consistent in application, and that somebody is really might have done something wrong, but maybe 90 people who did the same thing, nobody would have ever done anything about. So that person is more persecuted, than prosecuted, then I would say a patriotic person would nullify any injustice, any injustice. So we're here, and when we're in judgment of other people, our main goal should not be if it's legal or illegal. In my opinion, it should be, is it just or unjust? I think that's our obligation. Is, do we want to live in a just society, or do we want to live? I mean, a lot of the things that I don't like to keep using this as an example, but a lot of the atrocities, of putting Jews into concentration camps, into putting the badges on them and putting that was all done by law. I mean, so the question is, do a decent people, and we have this issue today that we not talking, that's still a polemic, is about, the 6 Democrats that did that video, regarding telling people that there were, illegal acts. And again, as we talked about last time, when George Washington had his opportunity in the Whiskey Rebellion, the only 2 people were convicted. But when they were convicted and sentenced to death, he pardoned. So Trump said he would do that because Trump knows nothing about history, because Trump will tell any lie with facility, and he doesn't even care if it has the truth or not, because then he'll just attack anyone who attacks them, and then he'll get a mob attacking them, so that they are cowering in fear, for telling the truth, or questioning, or he tells so many lies, that you seem like you're nitpicking because there's just so many lies, or people think the substance of his statement is true. So if they believe the substance of his statement is true, they justify the lies by saying the substance is true, even if there are lies. The main point is truthful. So he's just telling the truth using lies. So I don't think that's the way we should communicate with each other.
Oh, absolutely. A good example, to a much smaller degree, obviously. And I would even argue probably to a smaller degree, even if they were in the presidency. Trump's base is why this is, I think, as powerful as it is. But you saw Nancy Pelosi, for example, in I think numerous examples in the past, do something somewhat similar. Maxine Waters, for example, even Lindsey Graham from the other side. But I'm trying to think of Democrats who basically get like a base riled up about something, and then you get these radical left groups that will go out and do something, like we're seeing radical right groups go out and do things in the same way. I mean, and just to point out that this has been something that's been building, and Trump seems to have gotten this down to, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I forget the other guy's name who said the same, coming out, but her coming out and saying that she was threatened and then her resigning. I mean, that was a powerful move that I think shook a lot of people free from that kind of blind support. Because you're seeing the response of that. You can't hide. This mob is going after people and threatening people, and you've got the, I don't know, Nick Shoulders and Laura Loomers out there that are like rushing forward, driving people to go attack others while screeching about being doxxed or being called a fascist. I'm kind of going off on a point, but it's just kind of humorous to watch because of how, ridiculous it is, but it's also pretty extreme.
Yes. And I made a similar point, Ryan, in discussion of, given now that Fannie Willis case against all those people is dead now, even though she was able to get people. I mean, apparently that this prosecutor decided there's no evidence there, even though she got several people to plead guilty. Okay, they can acknowledge their guilt and who were cooperating. Instead of leveraging off of that, he just decided to pretend nobody did anything wrong. So kind of interesting. But when this judge, who was very prestigious, former judge and lawyer, when he was testifying, he acknowledged that Fannie Willis came to him prior to her boyfriend Wade, or ex-boyfriend Wade, whatever their circumstances are, and he said on a witness stand, he said, I don't want what goes along, the baggage that goes along with working on a case like this.
Right.
And the judge they could not find anyone who could prosecute it. So we don't know if they could find people to prosecute it because they didn't think there was a decent case there, or we don't know who people just said, I don't want the burden of being the one. I don't want them to live my life with death threats and stuff.
Right.
Like that. So what kind of statement does that make about the society we live in? I mean,
right.
and again, I'm not making this about right wing, left wing. Just people should listen to that and say, this is appalling. This is appalling that people, that responsible people sit back and say, it just isn't worth fighting for. I want to live my life. I want to live my life in reasonable peace. I don't want to expose my family. And I'm saying these are reasonable, these are legitimate arguments. I'm not condemning the person, who doesn't have the courage to put this at risk. I think our system is worth putting at risk. And I think if we want to preserve it, we have to take a risk to do it. But I don't want to sound too judgmental, because I think it's also reasonable to sit back and say, I got a responsibility to my family, and I don't want anything to happen to them, and so sure, I love my country, but really, how much am I going to change it, as opposed to really what the impact on the life of my loved ones.
Yeah.
So, but
it's an interesting double-edged sword on this, or I guess that'd be the wrong point, but it goes basically, you've got a situation. Oh, I think I just I just lost the thread on that. Sorry, go ahead, Jeffrey. Point just lost me. Go ahead. Well, I forgot what you just said. I was going to make a point.
I was referring to the circumstances where somebody has to divide their loyalty to their country versus their loyalty to their family. And if you and sometimes if you loyalty to your country, you're putting your family at risk. So I can understand people saying, I love my country, but there's a limit to my love. I love my family even more. And that's perfectly understandable. For me, I love my principles above everything.
I'm going to forget again. Hold on.
It's not the country, and I love, and it's not that I don't love my family, but for me, my principles come first in my life, but I don't expect, and the people who are close to me know that about me. So, so
before I forget again, though, the threats, like basically the threat goes two ways, right? Where I think what they do by doing that is clearly, I think, by design from the government to get people to be afraid to call things out, to push back. But so you basically set the tone where people are afraid to be honest or to go after it. But at the same time, you get, like you're saying, people who might have the morals and integrity and principles are going, screw that. I don't want to be involved in that chaos. And so we get the Bondis and the Noems and the Cash Patels. And that's, so like Bruce points out, you get like I call the junior team. So it kind of goes both ways, is they're kind of shooting themselves in the feet by having people that are too incompetent to truly do it the right way. But it started, I argue, by trying to scare people away from, calling these things out. So it's interesting how that's working out. It's sort of like a, dying empire point.
Yeah, one person now has made a point, says, what explains the desperate animality of Trump when he calls someone stupid for questioning his foreign policy?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's the place we're in right now. I mean, I think it's desperation. I think it's because Donald Trump knows you can't respond. If you look at the evidence, like we said, this is what I was saying before, the evidence is clear, right? He gave asylum, or his administration did. So that clearly, without question, means that you have responsibility. So he just goes, "Are you dumb?" It was Biden. And so then the talking point is that, and all the blind followers just skip right over that point. I think that's what it was. But that's what's so crazy is anybody honest in the room is like, well, it's pretty clear why you did that. So it's desperation. That's the only way I can read that.
Yeah, and one of the articles, I don't know if this one I shared with you was from, because I'm always looking for material, so I always check like Gateway Pundit because they always say so much stupid stuff.
Yeah.
There. And it's so hyper partisan. And like when they call these questions to Trump as gotcha questions. I mean, they loved gotcha questions to Biden. So
Right.
But they call giving to Trump, it's a gotcha question. It's a gotcha question, basically saying, yeah, why did you, given the facts of Afghanistan, given the facts of this, why do you just blame Joe Biden? And yeah, it's because I think it's a distraction, and the people and the MAGA people love it. And the type of publications that don't love it, they won't read. Okay. So like the people on the left, they'll read their publications that'll reinforce their beliefs, and they won't read the other publications because people don't make an effort to try and understand each other. So and that's pretty sad. And nobody wants to sit down and say, okay, let's try and figure out why we disagree and what are the facts and what things we disagree with. And some people, unfortunately, today don't, as you've already pointed out, don't even care about the facts. They just their beliefs are their beliefs and no fact pattern. Even if they don't dispute the data, even if they don't dispute the evidence, they might not dispute anything you said to get to your conclusion, but they still just say, I don't believe it. And
Right.
why they don't believe it is because they choose not to believe it. And that's satisfactory for them. So
I saw a really interesting point. I think this was 2015, maybe. It was maybe before that. I remember seeing Newt Gingrich speaking with, I believe it was CNN at the time. And I brought this up many times over the years because I saw at the time how this was going to play out. Not that I knew it would become this, but it was basically, he was talking about the FBI, that she brought up a graph that basically said, crime is down per the FBI from the administration you support, right? Like in every major state. And he goes, that's just not true. And she goes, it is. I mean, it's right here. I can prove it to you, And he goes, no, well, the people disagree. He's like, but the stats are clear. Like, that's not true. He goes, well, I'll go with the people. I'll agree with what people say. You can go with the stats. I was like, what? And so from a political perspective, from a politician, it was clearly, it became maybe long before this, but it was okay. Well, there's power in just in embracing what the collective mindset is as opposed to what the facts are, even against what the facts are showing. And I think I saw that was beginning to very much snowball in Trump's first administration. It just went crazy. And now look where we are, but I'm now seeing the other side of that. Like I've pointed out, I'm of the mind that the majority is not trapped in that. Maybe it's 49%, but I do think it's beginning to taper away from what it was because of how bombastic and obvious it is. But it's an interesting overlap to think about, that they just decided it's a Bernaysian, right? It's propaganda, manufacturing consent.
Yeah. I try and tell people, everyone who I have, discussions with, I try and say a good discipline when you're trying to convince somebody of something is that any claim you make, you have to separate out when you're expressing an opinion, when you're speculating on something,
right,
and when you're asserting something as an indisputable fact.
Right.
If you're submitting something as an indisputable fact, cite your source, okay? So anyone else can check it out. It's not just the words that come out of your mouth.
Right.
So if you're citing something as an opinion, okay, anyone is entitled to their opinion, and then when you ask people their opinion, you say, well, what's the foundation for your opinion? What due diligence did you do to reach that conclusion? How do you get to that opinion?
Right.
These are the type of questions I ask people when I get together. I want to understand how they think. So or don't think.
Yeah.
So, but I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to really get a sense of how I'm trying to understand them. And I give them the opportunity of understanding me, because whenever people will ask me, I will always explain to them, how I got to the conclusions I get, and I'm always very careful about separating out what an opinion of mine is and where I'm speculating, and what I'm using by deduction from the facts that are available. And then the question is the facts available, reliable facts that are available? So you have to always take them to some extent with a grain of salt. and that's what you rely upon if somebody really wants to have an intelligent conversation. So whatever your goals in conversation, if you just want to enjoy intelligent conversation, or do you want to convince somebody? The question is what do you think is your responsible to know something that you think is so unique that you want other people to know what you know? Okay, so what effort did you put into your knowledge that you think that would basically go to other people and say, you should rely upon all the effort I've put into accumulating this knowledge, so you don't have to put all the effort into doing it. But ultimately, if they put almost no effort into it, and then want to convince people of knowledge that they put almost no effort into it, that's just stupid. Okay,
Yeah.
my opinion.
A good Katie points to the Emperor's New Clothes, a good overlap, even more so than just the point we're making, is that you could argue that this goes even further, that a Trump or whoever, which I think it's both sides of this, but Trump is being played in many ways too, right? So he, like in the story, it's obviously the king is wearing nothing but believes he's got new clothes, so he's being played by people. Everyone's wondering. It's kind of like that in a way too. It's both sides of it, right? But it's just clear that there's just, I mean, if you right now talk to people, to take your point, like I was saying before about just taking it partisanship and ignoring the facts, the argument would be that their source is what Trump said or what Hegseth said or the statement, not the facts. But they believe that is the fact because they said so, so they're all trapped in this kind of Emperor's New Clothes kind of illusion. And that's, so it's trying to reach people is what we're doing. It's important to come at it from that angle, to try to highlight to them, not just that, you're wrong, let me prove it to you, but like try to get them to see through that illusion in ways that like they do themselves. It's, I've often brought up on a side note, a psychological part of this. Like, let's just say like COVID-19, they talked about mass psychosis. It's like, if that's what we're dealing with, and I kind of think that's where this is in partisanship, is there another avenue we should be taking than just trying to prove things? Is it more of like you're in a cult and we have to like rewire your brain back out of it? Like, sounds intense, but I feel like a conversation we should have.
Yeah. And going back to, point, and Kristi Noem acknowledging, and this is part of improving our conversation. My speculation, my opinion is the only reason why we learned the truth from Kristi Noem about that is because she knew that this Judge Boasberg was now proceeding with contempt. So, she might have had to testify under oath what she knew and didn't know. So I think while the MAGA people were attacking this judge, for being obsessed and going after and wanting to seek the truth, actually his seeking the truth has I'm cutting out. I didn't know that.
You're back now a little bit, but you've been cutting in and out just a little bit.
No, sorry. My internet connection usually is pretty good. But, it seems to me that the threat of her having to possibly testify under oath decided I better come out with the truth now. So maybe now I won't even need to testify because I've already gotten out, and hopefully that'll avoid me being under oath because I've now already admitted the fact is that, then now they'll have to figure out. Now the judge will have to figure out.
I'm not getting any of it, Jeffrey.
Oh.
I think I lost you there.
It says it's StreamYard.
I'll jump in case he's going to try to pop in and out. If you hear me, Jeffrey, you're completely frozen now. I would respond to your point, but I couldn't make out what you were saying. But if there you go. Are you back? Can you hear me? Oh, shoot. I was going to just jump into something until you get back, but if you're frozen now, I was just going to bring up something that I was going to bring up later. Two things I was hoping we could talk about would be the dismissal. Oh, there you are. Now you're back.
Okay.
So it looks like you're back now. Go ahead.
Okay. Now I'm saying that it's you having the issues, not me.
It could be. It definitely could be me. So sorry. I've been cutting out all over the place. So if the chat says that, then that's on me. Sorry. Normally my light goes on when it's having trouble. That's why I thought it was on your end. So
yeah, now I see you frozen. So fuzzy and frozen. So then somebody's now saying but they hear you. So I don't know. And then somebody said, then somebody's now telling me that StreamYard is freezing.
Okay.
So it could be a StreamYard problem.
I can hear you now, Jeffrey, if you want to continue.
Yeah. Let's continue until this cuts out again and becomes unpleasant for everyone. So So, but this has sidetracked me now. I forgot the point that I was making.
Oh, well, why don't I jump in then? Because I was just going to throw something out there since it was freezing. I thought it'd be interesting for us to discuss, since we haven't really gone back to it since the beginning, is the collapse of DOGE. Right? It's interesting, right? Because we were really talking about that at the beginning, and there's so many things going on. I mean, start with one interesting thing is that, so basically the Trump administration acknowledged that it doesn't exist anymore. Even Grok will now say that it has ended as of the November 25th, but Elon Musk is out there with his Doge account and claiming that Reuters and the rest are just completely making it up. But even Grok will tell you it's been shut down. So just in a general conversation point, I think it's fascinating with what happened after that, you know?
Well, I can tell you, as someone who has I've done distressed investing. So I bought bankrupt companies. I've turned them around, so I know when you go into a situation where you think you have a failing enterprise and you gotta convert a losing organization into a winning organization, that there's pretty much a framework that you need to approach in doing so. So, it was evident from the very beginning, Doggy, I like to call it a doggy. It was a dog. Okay. So I always like to call it a doggy. But the whole approach they took was a stupid approach. So you had to know that would produce a bad outcome and they would fail because the way they approached the job. For me, if I would have gone in, not that I would have any interest in doing it, I would have gone in. I, basically would have gone to everyone in the management level, and I would have said, I want you to go through a flow chart. If you think about what your job is today and how you do it is accumulation of decisions made, over years, over a long period of time. If I ripped up everything and you were starting from scratch and I said, this is what you need to do, tell me what you think is the most efficient way of doing it. Now, I would tell people if they came back with the answer that they would change nothing, they're going to be fired. Okay. So nobody's going to come back with the same thing. And then I tell people, you got to show me how you can do this even better, with 20% less. So if they can't figure that out, you set a goal that's an aggressive goal, because in the most, if you don't set aggressive goals, people won't challenge themselves.
Right.
If it's easy to do something. So if you say, this is what you need to do, my experience in the companies I went in is I got to figure out who the winners and losers are. I'll tell you what I did. Okay. When I went into a company that I had gotten control over, and I had to make it work. Okay. The first thing I do is I tell people, depending on how bad the circumstances are, when I got involved, is I say, nobody's going to get any money for 60 days. Okay. So I don't give anybody a penny, and I see whoever walks out, I'm happy that they leave. Okay. So I got to tell people, you got to give me a chance. You got to give me a 60-day chance to prove myself. And for 60 days, if you take no pay today, I'll guarantee you'll make more money, if we succeed, than the money you're giving up now. But I need to know you're committed to making this a success. I hold a meeting of the top 3 levels of management, but when do I hold the meeting? I hold it on like a Saturday or Sunday night at 4:00 in the morning. So people who don't show up, they're immediately fired. I want to know who's willing to go the extra mile. So I hold meetings at midnight, 2:00 in the morning, 3:00 in the morning, weekends, in the beginning, because I'm trying to find out who really is committed to make this thing work. So, and I'll always find the people who are committed and the people who don't, and they leave and nobody ever notices they're gone because they're the losers. The winners will be the ones that'll put the effort into it. They know they're taking a gamble. I try and establish my credentials so people should think that hopefully I give people the impression that I'm their best option. So they have no other better option, but if they have a better job, they should take another better job. So I know I don't want to have anyone who doesn't believe in the company and doesn't think that my plan, because I always come with a plan. So it's not like I come and say, trust me. I say, here's my plan. So for the people who show up, hear my plan, and they can judge me by judging, what they hear about me from other people and by the plan I present to them. And they know the business, and, so they can kind of judge whether the plan sounds like a reasonable plan, or not a reasonable plan. So, and I'm able to cut a lot of expenses out with the full support of everyone. But everybody feels ownership of the process. But you don't get 22, 23-year-old computer scientists whose first goal is, I got to assume that everybody who came in under Biden Biden is an idiot and I just get rid of them. Okay, independent of whatever, how important their functions were, and independent of who might be able to replace them if I got rid of them. So what do they have to do? They were firing people, then they had to hire the people back that they fired. So that cost more money than just keeping them on the job. I mean, it was just very stupid the way they were doing it. So,
can I ask you one quick thing on that point? That one point. Well, I mean, I don't want to derail you too much. Do you think that might have been flooding the zone in its own way? Because I have a larger opinion of what I think DOGE was. Like, do you think possibly doing it as chaotic as they did was an effort to like distract from at least what I think it was the only goal, but at least what I think was one of the goals, which was the AI training, the data, the large language models. I thought about the other day because it really was wild to me what they did, how they did it. It was clumsy. I mean, I'd like to think Elon at least, or either of them has some level of like business it just didn't seem right to me. So what do you think about that?
If the point you're making is, I understand your question, so I'll restate it to make sure I understand it. Okay. So if the point of your comment is, was their real goal to get the data, not to cut expenses?
And was this a distraction?
This way was a way of getting extracting all the information. And that was really their objective function. And all the other words were just and a distraction. If that's the point you're trying to make, it's a point I have not considered. But that sounds, credible to me, that they didn't really care about cutting expenses, that this was just about sending a whole bunch of people in and extracting all the information from every area of the government, and centralizing and having an archive that they could all use for the AI models. So, and they all supported that. They all supported, well, we got to find all these people, and they were willing to embrace any argument that was a pretext to get all the information.
Right.
So, you could be right. I mean, as you're saying it, maybe it sounds even more plausible to me that you are right, that they never really cared about saving money. Their objective function was not shrinking government. The objective function might have been two things. I make Trump happy by getting rid of a bunch of Biden people, and I get all the data I want doing it. So how do I get the data, and how do I get the government and people in this administration to support the big tech people who want all the data? So what do I need to do to keep them happy? So I get rid of the Biden people. I write things on social media, and so I mean, maybe it was brilliant on Musk's part, and maybe and maybe I should be acknowledging his brilliance is that he did get what he wanted, that he didn't really care about reducing spending, having a more rational budget. He didn't even care whether they ended up firing people who ended up coming back to work, that he didn't care about all that. He just wanted to make enough noise as this background so that he can get his team and they could get access to all the data as possible, as quickly as possible, before, the dog got, ended up not having momentum anymore. And maybe he knew its failure, was inevitable. And, and which is reasonable to assume, because, who was going to believe that Congress would really, endorse these cuts, and so, it sounds like to me you could be right, that really, Musk was a genius, and this was a backdoor to get all the data. I hadn't considered that, but, as you say it, it sounds highly plausible. And so, again, maybe instead of him being stupid, he was really smart, because that's what he really cared about.
We can make it both. We could say that he was trying to cut costs and failed, and also still make it a little more believable. No, I just think it's a point worth considering because of the way it ended up and how it just got dropped. Like on a dime, it just went away. And the whole Amy Gleason thing, she was supposed to be the one technically running it. And let's not forget that they took the U.S. Digital Services was what they just changed the name into DOGE. And so he did this thing that was not even, and Digital Services was about digital IDs, about wearables and the health side of it. And so he jumps in and it's like cutting costs. And we know they lied like crazy about all these things. Then he just vanishes. Then Gleason steps back up and she's doing stuff with HHS and wearables. And it's like it didn't even happen. It's just like that to me. It's like, how do they think people won't notice that? Which is why my question was, do you think it was just meant to be a big splashy show to do other things? I worry there's more even beyond that, where AI goes, what that might mean, but it's just worth considering.
I'm very worried about where AI will be growing, and I also think if we've I think we'll talk next week when we talk about the surveillance state, with a special fine print on surveillance next week. But I think it's the same thing with like everything the government does now. What are they saying? Oh, we're using all this technology because we got to find all the illegal immigrants. So that sounds reasonable to a lot of people today. Okay, but when they've rounded up every illegal immigrant, do you think they're going to surrender and not use this technology, or are they going to find another use for it?
And it's also worth pointing out that the only way they can do that would be to ubiquitously surveil everybody, which is what they're doing. Exactly.
So, but people who don't want the illegals think that this is a fair price to pay. But Ben Franklin would warn us that that's not a fair price to pay.
Right.
So, but again, we seem to, as the comment was made, it's a country comprised of too many partisan, stupid people, and that's what. Let me hear. Someone's now saying, I still hear Ryan, but he's either frozen or fuzzy. And yes, it's true. From my perspective, I'm fine on the YouTube side.
Sounds like it might be StreamYard, because I'm seeing both.
I've been asked to let you know that it's Indy in the chat. That he knows me, that you know him. And matter of fact, you're supposed to be meeting afterwards.
I'll be joining him for an interview later today. He does independent work as well. But what's interesting is StreamYard. Like for right now, both of us, mine look the same and clear. So I think StreamYard's been having a lot of issues lately, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I don't know if there are other platforms we should consider.
I like it the best, honestly. OBS is something you could use, but this is the most convenient, I think, or Restream. I use both actually.
Oh, I'm an amateur with respect to this, so I don't know how StreamYard got chosen. So I could ask Ray and the team. You stick with it, okay? Yeah,
I would. That's what I use.
This is the first time it's happened, and we'll see if it happens again next week, and we'll see if it's a StreamYard problem or your internet problem. After we finish
both.
This, I guess you can check. Yeah, it could be a little bit of both, exactly. So so we can. We can check this out, but yeah, I think that I think as George Carlin frequently said it, if the government says it, you shouldn't. There's no reason to believe it, and I think I don't think we have a reason to believe anything the government says, because the government's track record for lying to us, is much better than the government's track record for telling us the truth. So the government tells us what they want us to know and what they think we want to hear. And unfortunately, that's how most people are, is that people want to hear what they want to hear, or people only hear what they want to hear. So, it's very, very unfortunate, but I think the government always has an obligation that whatever it says, since it's a fiduciary and on our behalf, is that if it's a fiduciary, if my tax guy says to me, my tax person says to me, here's your tax return. I disagree with you trying to take this deduction or that deduction or whatever. My first question would be, show me the code. Okay. The tax person is not going to say to me, because I said so. The tax person will bring out the code and show me the code. So he won't just say, I'm not showing you the code. If the code is my private code, you can't read it. If I'm speaking to my lawyer and I have this opinion on writing this document, and I say I'm concerned about the legality or illegality of this text, the lawyer's not going to say, well, it's illegal or legal. And if I say if it's illegal, show me the citation backing up what you have to say. So I know every person I hire as a fiduciary, if I ask them to explain something to me and ask them to show me the evidence behind their statement, none of them has ever argued with me that they're not going to show me what I asked to be shown. So the only people that do this is the government. And think about how perverse this is. Okay. I go to my lawyer, I pay my lawyer, and if the lawyer I'm not happy with, I don't have to pay them because they don't respond to me, my accountant. So every fiduciary on my behalf, I choose. And if I don't think they're doing the job of disclosing to me what I need to know, I can get rid of them. Think about what the government is. The government is supposed to be a fiduciary, but they take money out of your pocket without your permission. Okay. And then if you ask them to back up things they say, they tell you it's none of your fucking business. So they're taking money out of your pocket. You don't have to consent to it. They can take it out, and they don't have to tell you anything. And people really think that's the world that George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, that was, you think that's what people thought they were ratifying after fighting a revolution, living under the Articles of Confederation, and then having to sit back and say, gee, maybe the Articles are not working out. I got to have some central government, but the skepticism they had to centralized power. Who really believes that the people who ratified the Constitution, if they would have been shown the application of that Constitution today, that to me is the real test. If Jefferson and Madison said, we got to construct the Constitution based upon the intention of the problems that they wanted to solve at the time the document was written, okay? Other than that, it's a blank slate that everybody's writing their own Constitution by force, not consent, okay? But coercion, because it didn't go through the process, the ratification process that the Constitution had to go through for it become the law of the land. So until we go through that process again, okay, which we have not, okay, but until we do that, this is the law of the land. And the law of the land had a very specific purpose: maximize freedom, maximize liberty, maximize justice, okay? Give people the freedom to choose their life on their own terms, okay? And the last thing we wanted was a despotic leader, okay? Any state of tyranny. So that was the goal. And that's the only way. And to sit and parse texts, yeah, anyone who's reasonably intelligent can parse a text, because as imprecise words are, you can always get them and twist them to mean something different than the intention of the person who wrote the words, who stated the words, or who understood those words. But nobody could really believe that back then the people decided, you know what, we want to give, we went through King George, we want to have somebody that has even more authority than King George, okay? And that people were ratifying that document. So until we replace that document with a new one, or until we amend it, okay, that's the document. It has to be interpreted the way the objective function they wanted, and they did not want their words parsed, okay? They were clear about what the objective was. So how can we sit back and make any statement that the fact is that the circumstances they remotely resemble, or they would have found anything, they would have not found our dialogue today, repulsive. Yeah. Okay. I really want to hear, Thomas and Clarence Thomas and Roberts and Gorsuch. I want them to really sit back and say, if they have the gall to say, yes, James Madison, if he woke up today, he would be very proud of us. Okay, that yes, we're interpreting the document on the terms and conditions that he would. Yes, these people are alien. Trinidad are alien enemies. Okay, yes, we have an invasion. Yes, people are not entitled to the due process. Yes, we can go out and we could kill all these people and then do a second strike and get them. And that's no problem. Why not do a third strike? Okay. Why ever take any prisoner of war? Let's just go to war. We don't need the president. We don't need only the president to determine this. And, and there is no international law. We'll just take everybody and we'll just kill them. So second strike, just kill them all. That's George Washington's motto. That was Thomas Jefferson's motto. James Madison. That's the purpose. You think that was their motto? Let's kill them all. Okay. Yeah, I think this administration's model. Trump and Hegseth said that's their model. Kill them all.
It comes down to, obviously they don't believe in the foundational elements of the Constitution or any of it. They believe that they should have the power and that anything that restricts their power shouldn't be there. And so they can't come out and say that, right? They can't come out and go, we don't want that, because they know their people believe in it. So they just have to come out and say, like you said, just twist it around and say, this is what this actually means. So this is why this is the way it should be. And people just blindly accept it like we talked about in the beginning. And so we just, as Bruce always points out, we need more intelligent people, more constitutionally versed people to be able to recognize that's simply not true. I do believe that that's where we are, or are getting to, because of what we're doing, because of the work that's out there. I think that's where we're getting to. And we just need to see some action around it, you know. Just heads up, that's what he's referring to. I'm interviewing with him in about 9 minutes, so we can wrap up there. But I think that's, you know, why what we're doing is important, Jeffrey.
I agree with that. So, what would you like to be? You know, as you always know, well, I don't always honor it. I mean, I like always say that I like the guest to have the last words, even though sometimes I take the last word.
I'll be sure and say something that you want to respond
to. So go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I mean,
acknowledge it. Okay.
Pretty much just what I said. I think, you know, it's what's on my mind right now is just that, you know, it's very, very obvious that the power structures, the government that we're dealing with, and it's, by the way, as David Icke and others would point out, it's the same stuff's happening in the UK and others, right? It's a global thing that's happening, but just recognize that they're powerful people who I argue have always really been behind the scenes, just waiting in the wings, who are, you know, influencing, kind of dictating a lot of things we didn't realize, but are very clearly trying to step back in front. That's the Silicon Valley types. That's the technocrats. That's how I see it anyway. And they don't believe in anything that we believe in, that holds value. And so right now, what they're trying to do is to convince us that what they're doing and somehow is in line with what we actually want. And I argue that the real point is, once we get there, the veil's pulled back and we'll wake up to our situation and realize that there's no going back from it. And I don't like to make it as extreme as that, but I do that's, in my experience, that's really where I feel we're going. And so it behooves us to really stand back and look at what the intentions are, who's funding them, right? Who benefits, those classic conversations we've always had. And I think it becomes pretty clear. So thanks again, Jeffrey.
Well, thank you, Ryan. Good luck with your next interview with Indy, and my regards to Indy and all the people who make this more enjoyable by commenting and joining us. I greatly appreciate that, and I know Ryan does as well. I don't like to speak for Ryan, but we really do, and we're glad that we have a great time, and we're glad others are also having a good time. So thank everyone, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
See you next time.